Okay, so welcome everybody back to the Asheville Vedic Astrology YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology. I'm here with Ramya Krishnamurti of LexingtonAstrology.com in the Boston area. We're going to be talking today about the Astrology of Twins. Ramya is an NCGR board member, and the NCGR is a nonprofit educational and research organization, which stands for National Council for Geocosmic Research. She practices both Western and Vedic astrology, and she's also going to be speaking at the UAC 2018 conference in Chicago in May. So I want to welcome you, Ramya. It's wonderful to be with you today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this topic, and it's obviously important for both of us for a couple of reasons. Number one, your husband is a twin. My wife is a twin. Turns out twins are everywhere.
Yes.
And one of the interesting things about twin astrology comes down to the idea of why is it that one twin has a particular experience in life or particular personality? Why is it possible for there to be so many differences in perception and experience and so on when they're born so close together? So from your perspective, having your husband as a twin and probably looking at other twins charts, how do you approach that question? How is there such a difference between two people that were born essentially at the same time?
So, the question comes back to born at the same time, because I think in the past, when I look at charts of my husband or people who were born, say, when cesareans became more popular, I find that they're actually spaced out enough that there is enough of a difference in the chart, or certain aspects are tighter or not tighter, so that can kind of account for the differences in maybe timing, because the dashas are off by a little bit. So certain things may happen at the same time, but with a gap, or so it can account for that. But what I noticed recently is with the cesarean births happening more and more frequently is that there really isn't, any difference in the timing. So then that brought on this whole conundrum of, geez, I've been looking at my husband's chart for a long time now, and I kind of have this thing, he's got a half an hour difference between him and his twin, and that accounts for these things. But now with a 50-second or a 1 minute difference, it no longer accounts for it. So that's what kind of got me interested and started on this. So I don't know if you found, like with your wife, I don't know if they had a wide enough birth time, or
yeah, they had some minutes between them. And did you say your husband had 30 minutes difference, or was
30
that
minutes?
okay? Well, that's a good bit.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
between the two people. But yeah, there was definitely 7 minutes difference.
7 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think, when you look at the Western chart, I'll talk at it from both points of view, since I do both. On the Western chart, if there's enough of a difference, then, as I said, either that, you look to see how tight aspects are, and then that's when you realize something goes out of aspect, or something is in the aspect, or the ascendant has changed enough that something is no longer that angular, so it's not as important. So I look at those kinds of things, and so it's like it makes sense. But when you get to the really tight timing, then it's much harder. So in those instances, I found the Vedic astrology to be useful when you're using the divisional charts,
right?
Because you'll always find that there is a difference in the divisional charts. Once you start dividing it up to the Navamsha.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who are following the Western astrology, that would be if you did the ninth harmonic.
Okay. And so when we're thinking about this difference between Western and Vedic or Indian astrology, so with the Western, what you're doing is you're trying to see when planets, their aspects aren't quite as powerful.
Yes.
Or is that what you're trying to describe here?
Yes,
Or
exactly.
when the ascendant changes? Because with your husband, if it's a half hour difference, well, then that ascendant could have moved a quarter of a way. It could be a quarter different than.
Right.
And in that regard, that could change the degrees and how those degrees relate to the particular planets and combinations and whatnot, correct?
Exactly. Yep, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. And then the Vedic, what you're saying is that what helps out a lot is looking at the differences in the divisional charts like the Navamsha and so on, because they change so quickly.
Exactly. Yeah, because they change so quickly.
Right.
So
Yeah, the moon, I was just kind of going back over this a few days ago with the Shastyamsha, the D60, which is,
Yeah.
and, again, I don't know how this relates to Western astrology, but if the ninth divisional chart is the ninth harmonic, then I would assume that there could potentially be a 60th harmonic. Does it go that far in Western astrology?
It doesn't, but I guess they could do the same calculation. And the interesting thing is the harmonic calculations are different from
Oh,
all of the
okay.
divisional charts. The ninth harmonic and the Navamsha actually do tally, because that's one where I did the calculations on the software and they tally up. So
Okay.
that
What
I
about,
know works, though it's not used for the same thing. I mean, in the Western
oh,
astrology, the harmonic is not used in the same way, and it's none of the harmonic charts are used as, or I mean, in my experience, are not used as frequently as the divisional charts are in Indian astrology.
okay. Well, that brings up two other questions. And one is, so you're saying that the ninth harmonic does have a similar calculation as the Navamsha,
Yes.
but it's used for something a little bit differently. The Drekana or the Decanate, what are the D3? Is that similar at all? Do you know? I'm
I
curious about
don't
that.
know. I mean, I
Okay.
only did the comparison for the D9s, and I know I checked through a couple of those, and I can't
Right.
remember now which ones match and which
Okay.
ones don't, but a bunch of them don't match.
Well, this will be another question for Chris Brennan, I suppose. Yeah. So in that regard, then they change rapidly, and with the D60 in Vedic astrology, that ascendant potentially can change as quickly as every 2 minutes. The moon changes very rapidly, and so in that regard, that gives a different ascendant, which changes how all the planets influence that D60.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at through Vedic astrology, that's one of the things that I use in particular in regards to kind of seeing the difference there.
Hmm.
One thing that I was told a long time ago, actually, I read it in an article, I can't remember which book it was, but when another Vedic astrologer, this question was brought up to them, they said what they do is they consider the birth to be like the event,
Hmm.
and the child that's born first, they look at the 11th sign from the ascendant, because that would be the older sibling, and
Right.
they look at the third sign from the ascendant, and that's how they read the chart. And I'd actually found that to work pretty well.
Yeah.
Does Western astrology, do they go into like looking at houses in that regard too? Like, does third represent younger siblings and so on?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah, the third represents the younger sibling, the 11th, the older one. And I actually did, when I was trying to do this research on twins, I came across a YouTube video clip where it was Pandit Sanjay Rath who said
Uh-huh.
he does that apparently. He
Oh,
he uses, if there's twins, he uses the first one's chart as is, and then for the second one, he moves the ascendant three houses over so that
right,
he can read that chart as the younger
right,
sibling's chart.
right,
So, and then he does the 11th house and the moves one of them up and the other one down to see which one fits better, and
right,
then he uses that. So I have heard that, and that is absolutely something you could do with the Western chart.
right.
And what I found is when I've used the Navamshas, I've had like fairly good results with those.
Hmm.
So I haven't had to experiment with the moving up the 3 and the 9, or I haven't experimented 3 and the 11. I haven't experimented with it as much.
Hmm.
Like I'll give you an example. So there was this twins who were born 50 seconds apart, and the difference was quite. They're still young. The kids are still young, but one of them is autistic and the other one is not.
Hmm.
So in those kinds of, that's kind of what got me into the whole twin conundrum in the first place, because, here they are born 50 seconds apart, but yet how can they be so different?
Right.
In the case of, for example, my husband and his twin, they were born 30 minutes apart. They're not that different. Yes, there are
Okay.
different things happen at different times, but they're not that different.
Right.
So in this case, it was really intriguing that there would be such a big difference in the two kids. So when I looked at the Navamsha hadn't changed either, because it was only 50 seconds.
Right.
Sorry, it was only 1 minute. So when I kind of tinkered with that a little bit and increased it to an extra 50 seconds, I found that the ascendant changed.
Hmm.
And so when I did that, I noticed, so one of the children had an afflicted second house, and the other child had an afflicted third house. So the
Ah,
one with the third house was the one who had a sibling who was autistic. So
right.
that was the typical child, if you will. And so I'm guessing that, the typical child has had to, make accommodations for the younger sibling and is impacted by the afflicted third house, whereas the child who is autistic has an afflicted second house, which is affecting his ability to communicate with the world,
right,
and communicate with everyone. So by sort of, you have to do a little bit of rectification. So if you do a little bit of rectification and you move it just enough and you see, oh, this makes sense, then I try to go with the Navamsha, because with the D60, because it's a much finer tuned chart,
right.
that unless you have it down to like the correct, I think it's like 30 seconds or so it moves.
Yeah.
So unless you have it down to that level, I'm more hesitant to use the D60, but I believe, that's what is said, is the D60 kind of tells you what the, what the karma of the person is, right?
Right. It shows you how the theory is that it shows you how everything's going to shake out in the end.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, the D60, all these charts, there's an average in which they move. And so the average for the D60 is around 2 minutes. But then again, that depends on what time of year it is. It depends on where you're born on the planet, but that is the average. So yeah, it can move really quickly. And that brings up a really good point in general, that rectification typically often has to be done on some level anyway. You know, because when you're talking to someone and you're going over certain things, and certain things make sense and certain things don't. Well, again, that little bit of time, even when we're not talking about twins, can make a huge difference. But this brings one question up for me. So you're saying that in your experience, your spouse, who they're born 30 minutes apart, they're not necessarily that different, but then the individuals who were born like 50 seconds or 2 minutes apart, that made a really huge difference in that regard.
Yeah.
So, what I've noticed, with my wife and her life and her sister's life and whatnot, is that, we don't have any kids. Her sister has 2 kids. We've been together since I was 16. Her sister's been divorced. They have different interests. So there's a lot of things that are different about them. But what's always fascinating is that when we show up to family reunions or whatever it might be, they're always dressed like they haven't seen each other. One lives in Buffalo. We live down here in Asheville, and they'll be dressed almost exactly the same, or they'll have bought the exact same purse and not told anyone. So. I'm just kind of curious with your experience and your husband. You say they're not that different, but when it comes to timing and things, you said there's some difference in that regard.
Yeah. So there has been, both of us have 2 kids. Both of us have, even down to like the kind of cars that they've picked, and down to, the kind of houses we live in, the kind of, lives they lead. Both of them are in high tech.
Right.
One does software, one does hardware, but it's all pretty much in the same sort of form, same kind of, lifestyle. But when it comes to timing, one, finished his master's, got into his master's a year earlier than the other one. One started working a year earlier than the other one. One got married a year earlier than the other one. But the other one had the kid like a year before the other twin. So it's like the timing is off. And I feel like the timing was kind of consistently like a year off until they both got married.
Interesting.
And then after they got married, then it seems like the timing is still off, but it's not as consistent as it was before.
How different are their dashas? Like when you're looking at their dashas, like do the bhuktis, like do they change, or are they in totally different dashas? What's that situation? Do you remember?
So yeah, their bhuktis change. And again, I don't see a huge difference in their dasha bhuktis, which again is interesting to me, because you would expect with the 1 year difference,
right,
that would be the case. But there is an explanation for a 1 year difference if you were to maybe look at a progressed chart. So in the Western system, you have the progressions, the solar progressions and the secondary progressions. So in that, every degree can count for a year.
Right.
So in that sense, some of the outer planets, you have a friend.
Yeah, he's a twin too.
It's a twin, or like triplets, quadruplets.
Yeah, quadruplets, really.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So in that sense, you can see maybe, you might be able to explain that, because each degree is equal to 1 year.
Right.
So that would make sense that, if it's an outer planet and moves, slowly, or if you've got the sun that moves 1 degree a year, then yes, something could happen that could be making an aspect a year out for one person and hasn't made that aspect yet for
Right.
the other person. So that is a way you could explain it.
So that in regard, you're looking at the progressions there, correct?
Yes, the progressions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's interesting.
So we're just adding more tools to the toolkit because the whole twin conundrum is so complex.
Right. Well, one thing I've thought about that, I do think all the tools we have are fantastic. But I think an important aspect to consider, what is your spouse's, his brother's married too, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, maybe you know this, maybe you don't. Is your chart radically different than his wife's chart, or are they similar?
I don't know her chart, but if
Okay.
I just looked at the sun sign, I'm a Leo and she's an Aquarius. So we're kind of on the opposite sides of the chart.
Yeah, that would be different. So one of the things I've often thought about, just with astrology, I know we talked about, we're going to get into some philosophical things here, is
Yeah.
that the astrological chart represents the kind of the stamp of the direction you were going in from all past lives, theoretically. The moment you're born, then that's showing the direction of where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that we have to remember is that, once the ball is released, if you will, all kinds of things can happen to that ball. A wind can come, someone can catch it, a bird can, fly into it, whatever it might be. And what I've always noticed is that when we have twins that tend to live further apart and go in different crowds and these sorts of things, they're typically the ones that have a little more different life experiences. And my thought is because we're all like astrological chemical structures. And so if I'm with a certain group of people, well, their exalted Jupiter, in my 12th house is going to impact me and how my life develops quite differently than someone else who might have a debilitated Mars in that. And so if I'm running with the person who's got the exalted Jupiter and they're running with the person with the debilitated Mars, that's also going to, in a way, alter how the chart's going to express. Do you understand what I'm trying to get at here?
Yeah, I am with you on that. I mean, that is not something I thought of, but
Uh-huh.
I think that's it. And that could explain why, until they got married, things were kind of going on a parallel track. And then the person who influences you the most is your spouse.
Right.
And so, typically if you ask an astrologer to look at, let's say you were asking someone, what are the chances of me selling this house? You would look at the husband and the wife to see, well, you don't have a great prospect of selling the house, but the other person does.
Exactly.
So you kind of blend it together. So maybe that's what happens, is what I've always thought. But what you say makes perfect sense. It's not just the spouse, but it's also the circles that they move in and everyone who is having an impact on that person.
Right.
And there's scientific research where they say that a skinny person, if they hang out a lot with a person who, people who are plump, they end up becoming plump and vice versa. It's just...
Well, that takes us down a whole nother rabbit hole, because the interesting thing about that is that there's the idea of what we call the microbiome, which is what our body is made up of, all the viruses and organisms and bacteria and whatnot. And what they found is that, like you're talking about, people who weigh more, or people who have a little bit not necessarily as healthy lifestyle, that they have a different microbiome. And these are things that we share. So like if you live in the same environment with someone, you share the same microbiome, which in a way causes you to make choices that support that microbiome. And so, this whole idea, I've thought about this a lot, that who you spend time with. I mean, why is it that all these, spiritual traditions say that it's so important, the company you keep? Right. And why is it that they say that, if you do have some bad karma, well, if you can spend time with a clear, enlightened person, whatever it might be, that'll help? That's because their field or their astrological chemistry, whatever it might be, influences yours.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you look at, when you compare charts, I don't know if you, like in the Western chart, when you overlay one on top of the other and you see, this person's, my moon is on this person's ascendant.
Right.
Would mean that I'm naturally going to be more nurturing towards that person.
Right.
And so that person benefits from being around me, because whenever they're around, I'm going to nurture them.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
You find those kind of people that fit in, and, it
it takes into consideration sort of the whole gamut of what astrology is about in a way, because what you're talking about, the synastry. When people are going to make big decisions, like you talked about buying a house or selling a house, something of that nature. Yeah. Typically, when I see someone making a big decision, or maybe it has to do with a health issue or something that's really profoundly going to impact them, I always tell them, give me the charts of your spouse, give me the chart of the person that your friend that you spend the most time with, because when I can overlay those, that in a sense can give me a little more idea of how your chart's going to express itself. But my other thought is, I'm not sure if you get into this or not, because I sort of get into relocational astrology, but not too much.
Okay.
And the reason I'm that way is because typically I have found that most of the time your karma follows you wherever you go. Right. I mean, generally speaking, your karma follows you wherever you go. But with the idea of relocational astrology, it's that certain planets are impacting you based on where you're located on the planet. So whether or not you tie this into twin astrology, do you have any thoughts on the idea of relocational astrology?
Yeah, I think, yes, your karma follows you wherever you go, but you may have a pleasanter karma in certain spots than you do in others. Like, we were talking about Joyce earlier, and so she mentioned to me that she has a Jupiter line going through one of the states, I forget, somewhere in the Midwest where she's never visited. Uh-huh. But, she had an invitation to go there. So she said, well, why don't I go there and see what this Jupiter line going through that place is going to do for me? But basically, she landed there. She was supposed to make her own way there, but someone said, oh, why don't I come and pick you up because I'm going to go to the same place. She bumps into someone who says, oh, come, let me buy you dinner. And then, she gets dropped off. And then it's like, oh, yeah, we just upgraded you to this beautiful suite. So it's like definitely all these vegetarian, nice things happen to her there, right? So it kind of brings out that side. And sometimes, yeah, I do look into the relocation. Somebody was saying, oh, I'm trying to find a spouse and get married. And I said, well, the place that you're in, you've got Saturn going through it. So it's all responsibility and hard work. And that's what you're focused on. And, here you've got Venus line going through this other place. And if you're considering relocating there for your work, do it. It may not benefit your work, but you'll make a lot of connections, meet a lot of people. Right. So that kind of thing.
So you do relocational astrology, correct?
I do, yeah.
Okay, great.
I use it if someone is really asking about, well, I have 2 job offers and I'm thinking about going here or there, or, thinking of moving the whole family lock, stock, and barrel. It's like, well, these 3 people in the family are going to be really happy here, but so-and-so may not be so happy. So you kind of have to look at the whole dynamic.
Okay. But I can refer people to you, right? For that. That's great. Well, I mean, the whole idea that I think about that, again, going back to the idea of twin astrology, is that, where you live might make a big difference in how the twins' karma is going to get activated.
That's a great way of looking at it. Mm-hmm. That really is. And I should probably look because we're all the way over here on the East Coast, and then my husband's twin is all the way over on the West Coast.
Right. So that's perfect.
So it's perfect to actually look at the relocation astrology for both of them and see how, what kind of lines are going through each one and why, that could account for some of the differences.
Right. So, kind of what I've seen with work. I can't say that I've proven these things beyond a shadow of a doubt because I do not have endless supply of research dollars, but these are just theories that I think make the difference in, what makes one twins chart active versus another twins chart active. But I did have one quick question for you from a twin. Mm-hmm. I sort of asked her, and I said, what questions would you like to have answered? And the question that was given to me was, well, what makes a difference when 2 twins, like, is your husband and his brother, are they close emotionally? Like, do they share anything in that regard, or like, some twins like feel each other's stuff and that sort of thing?
I don't think they're actually identical twins, but I don't think they're like that. But they're very similar in many ways, but I don't know if they actually feel,
well, Well, the question kind of revolves around the idea of the boundaries between twins. And,
Mm.
this twin had gone to an acupuncturist and said, I feel a lot of things that my twin feels. And so
Mm.
how do I deal with that? And the acupuncturist just said, so it doesn't sound like you and your twin have come up with really great boundaries, possibly. And
Mm.
so my theory was that maybe in the chart it shows both of them having difficulty with boundaries. And so since you have identical twins in your sphere and they don't have that, I would assume that maybe in their astrological chart, generally there isn't boundary issues. You understand what I'm getting at here?
Yes, yeah, I
Does
see.
that seem to
Yeah,
be true, or?
yeah. Since they don't have any, I mean, they're both very sort of airy in some senses. So they're very detached, and so I think that's part of their makeup of who they are, their personality. So that personality, even though they're identical twins and they were together until they went to college, they were together. They were in the same class, taking the same courses, doing all the same stuff.
Right.
But I think I don't think they ever had the issue, the boundary issue, because that's not what their characteristic makeup is.
But do
But
they
I
have,
think
so they don't have that in
tendencies,
general?
no, I
Okay.
don't
Okay,
think
great.
so. Yeah.
Right.
I think, I can see how a very intense person, um, if they're both born at the same, very close to the same time and both have very intense personalities, and how they could then end up having the boundary issue because they're both very intense.
Right. Okay, so it sounds like you're on board with the idea that if it's in the chart for both of them, then they might have those boundary issues. But if the twins themselves, like if that chart we're looking at for the twins, if it's not there, it's likely
Yeah.
that that might not be an issue.
Right. And I would be surprised if I ever found that, the chart as such shows a boundary issue and one twin had it and the other didn't.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Then we would have, a real conundrum like, oh, how did that happen?
Exactly, yeah. And that would probably be like you're talking about the difference in the degrees between planets or the aspectual strength and that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
So do you work with a lot of twins, or have you worked with a lot of twins in your practice other than studying your family?
I haven't. So this is like an area of research that I'm interested in. So I'm trying to collect all the data, and I keep trying to analyze as much as I can.
Hmm.
It started out in a slightly different way. I actually wanted to. I have some friends who have children, so I have young kids, and I have other friends who've got young kids, and there were a couple of them whose kids were diagnosed with autism. And that's not something that's traditionally in any of the texts or anything that we generally look at, but it
Right.
seems like it's something that's you're seeing more and more often. So I got interested in that topic particularly. So I thought, let me start, researching this.
Hmm.
And then I had a preponderance of twin data because a lot of them were twins where one was fine and the other wasn't, or one twin was high functioning and the other wasn't. And then I just ended up thinking, you know what, maybe this whole twin thing needs to be figured out first, because it's sort of like, when you have a medical problem in the medical community, they try drugs on twins, because they share the same genetic material. So, they use one as the placebo and they try. So, and I said, geez, I wonder if twins are also one of the key elements of figuring out astrology. We always wonder about, well, do dashas work better? Do astrological transits work better? Or is it, what tool should we be using and what has the answer? And maybe if we could figure out the answer for twins,
Uh-huh.
then we could figure out the answers for a lot of other things. So then that's how my interest in twins started to develop. And then I started trying to collect, twin data. So if anyone has twin data, please feel free to
Yes. LexingtonAstrology.com. Your email address is on there, right?
Yeah, and they can shoot me or contact me and just leave me their data. So I mean, I'll be happy to collect data. So
Okay.
I haven't come out with any specific, like you said, I've thought about the third house, 11th house. I've thought about the progressions, how they could impact it, how dasha sequence could be impactful,
Right.
the Shashtiamsha, the D9. I don't have a one size fits all yet,
Right.
and maybe I won't,
Yeah.
but.
I mean, it's as big as a conundrum as astrology is itself, I think,
Yes.
I mean, it
Yes.
seems like all these things are extremely important, but then again, to get those nailed down, the progressions, the dashas, D9, the D60, whatever it might be, to get all those nailed down, then again, we have to test the things like, all right, well, who are the people they spend time with?
Yes.
Where do they live? I mean, I think these are all things that can be addressed, and probably in 1,000 years we'll have people interested enough, again, to fund the research.
Exactly.
But I think it's a great start, what you're talking about, focusing on those particular areas to see how they play out between the two charts. So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the research a couple of times because, that's something that, a lot of us serious astrologers are struggling with, balancing our time and trying to do our passion, which is the research part of it. And then because of the lack of time, the funds, and, not having, it's not done in the same way that it is in the medical field or
right.
something, right? So there's a lack there. And I'm just going to do a little plug for NCGR because
Yes.
the whole mission is to research, to educate, to test these theories, and that's why it was created.
Mhm.
And we have a research director who is trying to bring up the focus and put the spotlight on research. And so hopefully, as we keep collecting data and as people keep chipping away at it, eventually we will have more research out there that all the astrologers can use and tap into.
Right. Good. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's wonderful. And, that's one of the things that you are going to be speaking on at UAC is dealing with technology for astrologers. And it's also important, I think, to realize that the technology we have now is amazing to support things like research. I mean, we don't have to spend, 10 days just calculating a chart and then creating all the divisional charts and doing all that. We can simply enter in the information and then, there it is. So
Right.
there's a lot of possibility now. We just have to kind of get the ball rolling
Yeah,
a little more
I
fully in
totally
that regard.
agree. Yeah, so we're making the little steps, and yeah, I'm looking forward to UAC in May. And it's for those of the audience who may not know, it's sponsored by all of the big astrology organizations, and NCGR is one of them. And we're looking forward to having a huge swath of people from Vedic astrology, from Western astrology, a lot of great speakers on many topics. And NCGR is sponsoring a technical workshop for the astrologers that I'll be presenting on. And
Mhm.
like you said, I think it's a key tool because a lot of astrologers are not, are work in a different realm, and
Mhm.
not everyone is as tech savvy. And I think, like you said, there's a lot of tools out there that can be put to good use.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to that in May.
And you'll be doing that with Nadia Moreau, correct?
Yes, with Nadia. So Nadia is going to be doing, social media and things like that to get the astrologers more savvy about what's out there and how to communicate. And then I'll be doing some more of the technical things like spreadsheets and stuff like that they can use for, sharing documents, for helping with the research and things like that.
Right. Okay, good. So that'll be in May in Chicago. I'll put a link to it down here at the bottom of this video as well. And those of you may remember Nadia. She's been on this channel before, talking about the science of astrology and the physics of astrology. So you can go check out more of her videos. So maybe we'll just go ahead and conclude here for today and think about some future things we can discuss. I know we talked about that previously before we started recording. And your uncle's going to be on the channel as well.
Yes, he is.
Yes. So hold on for that. This is a really wonderful treat, and I'm currently working on editing the video. Would you like to say anything about your uncle? Just, since he's your
Sure, yeah.
family?
He's technically he's my granduncle,
Uh-huh.
but he's been doing this for a long time. He's an expert on panchangs, and he's been working on these calculations for a very long time. And he's got some radical ideas, and I'm sure he's sharing that with Ryan, and he'll be posting that.
Yeah.
But he's been doing this for a very long time, and he's a very, he is a scholar, and he's very well versed with a lot of the ancient texts.
Mhm.
And he's really like right in the thick of things. And he and two other of his colleagues have been working on putting together, a tropical panchang, and
Mhm.
all of his questions and answers. I think it's going to be a real treat. It's great to have him on and do this on record because he's getting older. He's been doing this on his own. It's basically him and his two colleagues. They've been doing it all on their own and trying to get it as much publicity as they can. Their work is has got solid backing of 2 Shankaracharyas, and that is a big deal. So I look forward to seeing you put that together. And
how old is he now?
I think he's about he's 80. I don't know his exact
okay
age.
Yeah, I thought it was 79 or something, but I read that he retired at 79, so I thought I thought he might be just a little bit older than that.
Yeah, he's a little bit older. He's been he's a very active, energetic person, and
yes,
he's a shame.
Well,
So
it definitely comes through. So, I'm really looking forward to get that up. Well, anyway, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. And you can be reached at lexingtonastrology.com. Is there any particular email address, or should they just go to the website and fill in the form?
They can just go into the website and fill out a form. Yes.
Okay. Well, good. Well, I'll do some editing on this, and then we can plan some future videos to do as well.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ramya.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.